Chessenta is a mosaic of a nation that was made by 10 different artists, all of them blindfolded. Heptios, Mage of Simbar. Chessenta is a loose collection of culturally related but independent coastal city-states. It is a part of the Forgotten Realms campaign setting for Dungeons & Dragons. More specifically, it is located in the Old Empires region on the southern coast of the Sea of Fallen Stars, which lies on the continent of Faerun on the planet Toril, which floats in the wild space system known as Realmspace. The region of the Old Empires consists of Chessenta, Mulhorand, and Unther, and it is called the Old Empires because, well, they were empires and they are extremely old. They have been around longer than the cities of the Sword Coast, the famous elven city of Mithranor, and are even older than parts of Netheril. While they have been empires in the past, none of them can really be considered one anymore. As I said earlier, Chessenta is a collection of independent city-states. They have no national government, and while they share a culture to an extent, the culture, laws, and character of each city can differ significantly. Chessenta is a cultured place, a place where poetry, theater, and philosophy thrive. It is also a society obsessed with physical conflict. Athletic competitions and all-out wars between the city-states are the most common pastimes. Bards tell tales of magnificent war heroes, and sometimes even cults form around these figures. Quote, "It is said to be a rich, fertile land filled with wild, drunkenly crazy people. And in Symbian dance plays, a staggering comic acrobat is often noted as the Chessentan." End quote. If you don't want to watch this whole ridiculously long video, and you want all of Chessenta summed up in 2 words, here you go. Ancient Greece. It's basically just ancient Greece, but put into the Forgotten Realms. I feel like the Forgotten Realms does a pretty good job at not having super on-the-nose, one-to-one real-world analogs. However, the Old Empires region is sort of the main exception to this. Chessenta is very, very obviously based on ancient Greece. But anyway, it's still the Forgotten Realms, it's still a fantasy setting, and there are still some huge differences. Not to mention, if you're a dungeon master looking to run a session placed here, you're going to want to know specifics about the things here. So, without any further ado, let's get into it. Okay, quick disclaimer before I get into the video. All of the information on Chessenta in 5th edition is from the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide. Now, throughout this entire video, I referred to that book as taking place in 1492 DR, which is an in-universe date in the Forgotten Realms. I do that because most of the 5th edition adventures take place in 1492, so I assume the Sword Coast Adventurer's Guide was the same. It is not. It actually takes place in 1489, 3 years before. This shouldn't really make a difference, but I just wanted to let you know so that this is factually as correct as possible. I say it a lot, and I had already recorded and edited the video by the time I realized this mistake, so that's why I didn't re-record it. With that out of the way, let's get back to Chessenta. Chessenta has a population of 1.2 million as of 1357 DR. It has a population of 3.4 million as of 1372, consisting of 82% humans, 6% halflings, 5% dwarves, 4% half-orcs, 2% lizardmen, and 1% other. History. Now, before I tell you what Chessenta is like now, we first need to look at how it came to be and how that shaped what they are today. Now, as a little disclaimer, Chessenta, and therefore most of their historic records, uses the Untheric calendar, established by the god king Gilgeam at the dawn of the Second Untheric Empire in -734 Dale Reckoning. So, -734 DR would be 1 UC, and 1480 DR would be 2215 UC. However, for the sake of consistency and ease of understanding, I will be using the standard Dale Reckoning calendar that is used in all Forgotten Realms products for the purposes of this video. So, Chessenta was established in -1771 DR as an autonomous province of the First Untheric Empire. It got its name from its first imperial magistrate, Ephraim Chess, whose first proclamation was to cleanse the territory of all indigenous species, particularly the dark-skinned Turami of the Akana and the Batoi halflings along the Adder River. Chessenta waged many war campaigns against Eastern Jomdath and the Fae of the Methwood. Over the years, its self-determination and independent mindset grew, invoking the wrath of Gilgeam, the god king of Unther. He sent troops to reassert his power over the province, but the Chessentan forces, led by the war hero Chazar, fought off the Untheran armies and won their independence in 929 DR. The province of Chessenta then became the Chessentan Empire, ruled by Overking Chazar from its capital city, Simbar. Chazar was known as the Great Red Dragon, for that was the symbol he used on his banner. Several sages postulated that he may in fact be an actual red dragon in disguise, but few Chessentans cared if that was the case, for he was a strong leader that led their people into prosperity. In 1018 DR, Chazar went off alone to fight raiding Sahuagin of the Alhambra Sea, and never returned. However, throughout all the thrones and chambers of Chessentan cities, images coalesced of Chazar standing atop a pile of Sahuagin corpses, telling his subjects, quote, "Know that I have won my greatest victory," end quote. Many believe the hero had ascended to godhood, and the Church of Chazar flourished throughout the realm. Unfortunately, without their Overking, Chessenta fractured into warring city-states over the next several decades, and they have stayed in this state ever since. In 1373, Chazar returned in his true Red Dragon form, retaking Simbar as his domain. He set plans into motion to conquer the rest of Chessenta and once again lead the Chessentan Empire. However, his plans were interrupted by the Spell Plague. The blue fire whisked him away, and pieces of Abir swapped places with much of western Chessenta. This piece of Abir was a section of the Genasi realm of Shir that toiled under the tyranny of the primordial Karshimis. The Genasi then formed the realm of Akinol, I assume named after the fertile farmland south of the Economir of the same name. After this, many of Chessenta's cities were destroyed, and the ones that still stood were devastated. Things got even worse for them since the Spell Plague caused the volcanoes of the Smoking Mountains and Mount Tholbane to continuously erupt. This spewed ash into the sky, allowing the vampire dragon Jackson Nadagor to roam freely during the day, and then sent the monsters of these areas fleeing, ultimately attacking the remaining Chessentan cities. The people of Luthchek rallied under the war hero Ishual Karanok and were able to defend their city, establishing Luthchek as the face of Chessenta and the self-proclaimed capital. During this time period, from the 1390s to the 1470s, Chessenta's power was consolidated around Luthchek. It wasn't quite a united nation, but many of the smaller towns and cities were vassals of Luthchek. After the Second Sundering, which occurred in 1486, Luthchek was no longer its central point of political power, and Chessenta was back to being as fractured as it had been for most of its existence. As far as I can tell, the Genasi realm of Akinol is no more, but at least one of its cities remains and is considered to be a part of Chessenta. People. Now let's discuss the people and culture of Chessenta. What are the people that live here like? First, we'll discuss the races. So, the most populous race in Chessenta are humans. And the most common human ethnic groups here, according to the Old Empire sourcebook, are the Mulani, Turami, Rashami, and Amnite, although Amnite is not a human ethnic group, but a nationality, being the people from so I'm not sure why it's mentioned here, but it's in the text. Anyway, Chessentans descended from the Untheri, so their human ancestry is primarily Mulani. However, over the generations, they have mixed with the Chandathan and Turami bloodlines of their neighbors. So while the previously mentioned races are the most common ones, generally, a lot of people here aren't going to be a one ethnicity pureblood, although many nobles and affluent people claim to be 100% Mulan, tracing their ancestry back to the nobles of Unther. However, Chessentans care more about your ability than your heritage when it comes to social class. The average Chessentan human is tall and slim, with a hint of olive coloring in their skin. Demi-humans. There's a decent amount of elves, half-orcs, orcs, dwarves, and halflings in Chessenta. The most common demi-humans are the orcs of the Flaming Spike tribe. They often raid cattle and sheep herds on the north shores of the Economir, but rarely attack humans. As of the 1350s, many of them had left the tribe to become traders in Airspur, where half-orcs were quickly becoming the dominant members of its society. The mercenary companies Chessenta is known for are made up of many demi-humans. While many peoples of the old empires are wary and distrusting of all things elven, half-elves are considered fully human and rarely discriminated against. Dwarves are also frequently found in Chessentan mercenary companies, though southern dwarves still consider Chessenta to be part of Unther and thus an enemy, at least as of 1357. The one exception to all of this is Luthchek, which is unwelcoming of demi-humans. I'll discuss it more later, but Luthchek hates arcane spellcasters, and they sentence wizards to death by burning. Orcs, half-orcs, and half-elves are tolerated, but full-blooded elves are considered magical by nature and are thus burned. Dwarves are considered earth magicians, and they are also burned. Now let's discuss the social classes of Chessenta. Like all of the old empires, Chessenta is divided into 3 social classes: the nobility, the middle class, and the slaves and serfs. The nobility of Chessenta live in beautiful palaces and large cities. Given their warrior culture and the constant wars that plague Chessenta, the nobility are usually warriors. Where Mulhoran values the divine, Chessenta obsesses over physical conflict. Rulers are often retired soldiers, placing their sons in charge of their armies and sending troops to the countryside to collect taxes. Nobles cast out of their class must be banished via public trial. Chessenta has no hierarchy of titles. Rulers of cities are usually referred to as kings, but sometimes a city just does their own thing. For example, the ruler of Simbar and later Erebos used the title Septinar, and Luthchek in the late 1400s used the title Warlord. People who perform great deeds on the battlefield are known as Hero of Blank, where blank is the name of the battle. They are then considered part of the noble class, regardless of their class beforehand, so it is theoretically possible for a slave to be elevated to noble status. Heroes are permitted to add heroic emblems to their shields and wear a copper ring on the 3rd finger of their left hand. To be granted the title, you must perform great deeds that are witnessed by a commander of noble rank. These are not given out on a whim, and there is rarely more than one in a battle. Priests and mages do not have special titles, as these are considered less than noble professions, except in Simbar, where teachers and philosophers from these classes are considered the pinnacle of human achievement. The middle class are composed mostly of tradesmen, merchants, and farmers. They control most of Chessenta's economy, and the city governments believe it is in their best interest to let the middle class thrive so they can rake in the taxes. The only place with restrictions on merchants is Luthchek. There, businesses cannot use wizards, shelter wizards, or even deal with wizards outside the city. Punishment for being a witch friend is being stripped of all property and possessions and executed via witchweed burning. Most farmers are freeholders with serfs to help in the fields and slaves to perform household duties. The serfs are paid minimal wages and given land in exchange for a portion of the crops they grow, but in actual practice, the difference between serfs and slaves is minimal. Slaves in Chessenta are often criminals forced to work in dangerous places such as mines, but they also import many from other places. Slavery is considered part of the natural order. Philosophers claim some men are naturally servile, and many of them become slaves. Slave work in the mines is wretched and unsafe, but most slaves live hard but not unpleasant lives. It is considered a virtue to reward slaves for a job well done, and masters can grant their freedom whenever they wish. Slaves in Chessenta are required to wear a thread around their wrist to identify them. Most slaves are kept illiterate, except in Simbar, where it is custom for all citizens and slaves to learn to read and write. Culture. Outsiders see their feasts and wars and view Chessentans as riotous, drunken people. Truthfully, Chessentans are an energetic people who rarely do things that aren't to the extreme. They live for today and have a tendency to lean towards excess and driven behavior, resulting in them creating works of art that cannot be found elsewhere on Toril, as they refuse to do anything halfway. Chessentans have no nationalism. They pride themselves on being members of their city-states, not of Chessenta, and these cities constantly war against each other and the cities of the Wizard's Reach, which they call the North Coast. It is said that Chessenta is the most cultured of the human nations in all the realms. The poetry, philosophy, astronomy, theater, and other forms of art and culture, even in places like Waterdeep, pale in comparison to Chessenta. The people are known for their confidence and energy, and are filled with love of literature, beautiful things, knowledge, and free thinking. Poets read poetry in public squares, philosophers debate in busy streets, and the theater scene thrives more than anywhere else. For warriors, their major pastime is athletic competition, which is an extremely important part of Chessentan life. The most notable of these are the Tholbian Games, a week-long tournament hosted every 2 years on the fields of Priolis at the foot of Mount Tholbane. When this happens, all wars cease. Competitions are always individual events. Chessentans prefer the strong, solitary hero as opposed to a coordinated team. The most popular sport is wrestling, which has two versions: traditional, which is akin to modern Greco-Roman, and pancration, which is a combination of wrestling and kickboxing with only biting, eye gouging, and breaking fingers disallowed. They also partake in chariot racing through an obstacle course, boxing, running, long jumping, javelin throwing, and the discus. In addition to poetry reading, theater group performances, and athletic competitions, the Chessentans also value feasting, which none are as adept at as they are. Chessentans are known as the most skilled architects in the realms. Their palaces are built in what's called temple style, large square roofs supported by decorated columns made from granite or marble. Chessenta is slightly cooler than the other old empires, so the citizens usually wear long flowing robes and short white tunics accompanied with capes that fall to the knees and cover the shoulders. They tend to be clean shaven with short cropped hair. The middle class and upper class dress the same, except the middle class do not have royal insignias or signets of heroism. Only mages and the crippled are permitted to wield staves. Language. According to the 2nd edition book Old Empires, which is where most of the information in this video is from, Chessentans used to speak Untheric, but switched to the common tongue of the West sometime around 1150 DR. The common tongue of the West I assume refers to common. However, in the Speaking in Tongues article in Dragon Annual number 4, which is still 2nd edition but came out 9 years later, Chessentans have their own language called Chessic. Now, since they broke off from Unther, you would expect Chessic to be related to Untheric, but according to this article, it's in its own language group called Chessin, which is part of the Faerunian language family, whereas Untheric is in the Raric language family. 3rd edition changes the name from Chessic to Chessentan, and does say that it is closely related to Untheric, with strong influences from Sharan and Shondathan. As of 5th edition, it is still referred to as Chessentan. It is written using the Thoras alphabet, which is the alphabet common and most human languages use. Untheric is still usually known as a second language and is often used in written records, being written using Dethic runes, at least as of 1357. Government. As I said earlier, Chessenta is not a united nation, but instead several independent city-states. They are completely independent. This isn't like Thesk, where they are city-states allied together in a confederation, and they have a member from each city that forms the Council of Thesk. No, Chessenta has no central council to discuss their affairs. As of the 1300s DR, Simbar would send ambassadors to all coastal cities, except Luthchek, to discuss trade threats from the North Coast cities, and if Chessenta was ever threatened by another's military, the armies of Simbar and Akanax would threaten each other into cooperating, but that's as close as they got. This lack of unification did change a little bit after the Spell Plague. Many of Chessenta's cities were destroyed, and the ones that still stood were devastated and further plagued by monsters fleeing other areas of devastation. The one city that stood strong was Luthchek under the rule of the war hero Ishual Karanok, who was able to lead them and allow Chessenta to prevail. After this, the country's provincial allegiances were largely solidified under the firm rule of Luthchek. This didn't last forever because as of 1492, Chessenta was once again a land of independent city-states. There are no regional divisions in Chessenta. Cities claim whatever territory they can handle. When two cities claim the same land, there is usually war. Territories and small communities are led by a local strongman or council, and these frequently pledge allegiance to a nearby city in exchange for military protection in emergencies. These are then expected to provide soldiers to the cities in wartime, but they hardly ever do. Cities are ruled by a king, who usually listens to a council of advisors elected by the land-holding male citizens. If a king ignores the advice of their council too often, they risk getting ousted from power. As of 1357, Akanax and Luthchek did not have official councils, but were instead ruled by absolute tyranny. Laws. Chessenta's legal system uses a revised version of the Code of Enlil, which is the legal system Unther used. One of the revisions is that anyone convicted of a capital crime has the right to defend himself in front of a jury, which must come to a unanimous decision. Also, anyone who kills a tyrant that oppressed the people is blameless. That being said, not all cities followed this code. Sentencing in Luthchek is based on the whims of the Karanoks, and punishment in Akanax is decided by a biased and only male military tribunal. The other cities for the most part followed the revised code of Enlil. Punishments for crimes in Chessenta have 4 levels: fines, imprisonment, banishment, and execution. Murder and treason are punishable by execution, while public troublemaking, such as starting a riot or fight, is punishable by banishment. No examples are given for the other 2 levels, but I assume it varies on a case-by-case basis. Religion. When Chessenta was first established as an Untheran province, they worshipped the Untheric pantheon. However, over the years, they abandoned their worship in favor of the contemporary human pantheon worshipped in most of Faerun. The main gods worshipped in Chessenta as of recent times are Anhur, Asaron, Azuth, Entropy, Lathander, Chazar, and Joaquin. So let's go over each of these. Anhur, the Mulhorandi god of war. His worship was brought to Chessenta by mercenary companies that worked in Mulhorand and then returned to Chessenta. Although a part of the Mulhorandi pantheon, his Chessentan worshippers see him as a southern power and not Mulhorandi. The center of his worship is Mordulkin, but he is also worshipped by a fair amount of Akanaxians. Asaron, the Untheric deity of revenge, known by the rest of Faerun as Hor. His worship in Unther was driven out by Raman, but it was revived in Chessenta. The center of Asaron's worship here is Akanax, mainly among the officers, as the rank-and-file soldiers have been turning to Anhur. Azuth, the Faerunian god of wizards, worshipped by mages in Simbar and Mordulkin, the 2 centers of magic in Chessenta. Once a year, his worshippers sacrifice specially made magical items to him. The main Chessentan temple to Azuth is in Simbar. Entropy. Entropy is a gigantic sphere of annihilation that no force, whether it be divine, magical, or mortal, can stop. Its priests are brought up to hate magic, and their worship consists of eldritch rituals and human sacrifices, usually of wizards. Entropy isn't really a god, although it's believed to be by its worshippers, and it's really only worshipped in Luthchek. In order to understand Entropy's significance to Chessenta and why it's worshipped, we need to have a small history lesson. The city of Luthchek has been ruled by the Karanok family since 1116. In 1324, Luthchek invaded Mordulkin but were defeated, blaming the loss on wizard spies, and the Karanoks have been obsessed with killing wizards ever since. In 1346, a large sphere of annihilation appeared in the middle of a torture chamber and completely consumed the wizard that was being tortured. The Karanoks took this as a sign of satisfaction with their persecution of mages, and began worshipping this non-deity, which they called Entropy. In 1370, Tiamat used her power to alter the spheres and make them conduits of her energy, using them to grant clerical spells to the nobles of the Karanok family, funneling its worship to her. She also caused the sphere to create several smaller spheres, which can be controlled by the members of the Karanok family. Now, that bit of information was from the 3rd edition book Lords of Darkness. However, the last bit seems to be a bit of a retcon. It claims that worshippers of Entropy did not start getting access to priest spells until Tiamat began granting them in its name in 1370. Lords of Darkness states Entropy isn't a god and probably isn't even a sentient being, as Tiamat was able to use them to grant spells and give worship to her without Entropy doing anything about it. It seems to imply that it really is just a large sphere of annihilation with no sentience. However, according to the 2nd edition book Old Empires, which takes place in 1357, the Lord of Luthchek was an 18th level priest of Entropy, and an 18th level priest definitely has divine spells. So, either Entropy was capable of granting spells on its own, the date that Tiamat took over Entropy is just incorrect, or another deity was granting spells in its place before Tiamat took on that role. The 4th edition article Backdrop Chessenta in Dungeon Magazine 178 says Entropy is actually a primordial who was imprisoned by Ao in a sphere of annihilation when primordials were banished to Abir. He did this as a warning to the gods: govern the world wisely or face utter oblivion. Entropy was incapable of doing anything while imprisoned, which explains why it did not interact with its followers and let Tiamat take advantage of it. But when the spell plague happened and the weave unraveled, it was freed, and now entropy is capable of spreading ruin across Toril. It says that the sphere grows wider and wider each day. Given the sphere was said to be small enough to be contained within a chamber of a Caranock mansion in 1346, and now in 1480 it is located 50 miles southeast in what is called the Maw of the God Swallower, I think it's safe to say it has grown over the centuries since the spell plague. They say that if it continues to grow, it will eventually consume the entire world, which makes its name very fitting. As of 1492, entropy is still worshipped in Luthchek, however it is unclear if it can grant cleric spells, if Tiamat is still running the show, or if the Maw of the God Swallower is still there, since all Plague Lands from 4th edition were undone in 5th edition, and the Maw of the God Swallower was considered a Plague Land. The next god worshipped in Chessenta is Lathander, the Faerunian god of vitality, youth, birth, self-perfection, athleticism, and creativity. He is worshipped in Chessenta primarily for his emphasis on self-perfection and athleticism, considering him as the perfect athlete. Sacrifices to him begin all athletic competitions, and he is always depicted in statues as a runner or wrestler. Sometimes he sends an avatar to Chessenta to test great athletes. He never loses, but if his opponent demonstrated great ability, he grants them a boon. A Monitor. So, 4th edition says that worship of a Monitor gained popularity in Chessenta after the Spell Plague. Now, a Monitor was the Netherese deity of law, order, and the sun, and he hadn't been worshipped since the fall of the Netherrealm Empire, presumed dead. However, after the Spell Plague, he returned at the same time that Lathander died. This led people to believe Lathander was an aspect of a Monitor and caused Lathander's church to begin worshipping a Monitor as the same god. So, when 4th edition says a Monitor was a major god worshipped in Chessenta, I would assume the Church of Lathander just switched to worshipping him. However, the same 4e text says that they believed a Monitor to be a reincarnation of Hakotep, the Untheric name for Horus Ray, the leader of the Mulhorandi pantheon. If that's the case, then they probably don't believe Lathander is a reincarnation of him, since they believe he's a reincarnation of Hakotep. So if that's the case, I'm not really sure what the Church of Lathander in Chessenta did in 4th edition, but I would assume that they also worshipped a Monitor. Also, as of 5th edition, Lathander and a Monitor are considered two separate beings again, and they are both still being worshipped, but by two separate churches, further confusing the shit out of me. I'm really not sure what to think about this, and the more I do think about it, the more my brain hurts. 4th edition really makes my job so much harder than it needs to be. So if anyone has any insight on this issue, I would love to hear your take on it in the comments. Anyways, let's move on to the next god worshipped in Chessenta, and that is Chazar, the father of Chessenta, the great red dragon, Chazar the Undying. Just like Entropy, Chazar is only worshipped in Chessenta, and his history is tied heavily with the region. So, Chazar is a red dragon who polymorphed into a human, united Chessenta by leading them in a rebellion against Unther in 929, and led the Chessentan Empire for a brief time. He believed that if he did this, getting the people to love him and consider him a hero, and then mysteriously disappeared, a cult would form and worship him, ascending him to godhood. So, in 1018 DR, he rode to battle a group of Sahuagin raiders, turned into his dragon form, killed the Sahuagin, and sent visions of himself standing atop a pile of their corpses to the throne and council chambers of all Chessentan cities, telling his subjects, quote, "Know that I have won my greatest victory." He then left and didn't return, letting the people believe he had ascended to godhood in the Outer Planes. This worked, and a cult of Chazar was founded, and he became a god. Specifically a demi-power, which is the least powerful you can be while still being a god, and he was capable of granting up to 5th level spells to his priests. Anyways, during the time of troubles in 1358, where all the gods were cast to Toril in mortal form, Tiamat was cast down and slain by Gilgeam. Her essence then inhabited the bodies of 3 chromatic dragons, Chazar being one of them. This essence caused Chazar to seek out and kill the other 2 dragons, subsuming each part of Tiamat's essence. Once both were killed, Tiamat was reformed and ate Chazar. After this, most of his followers began worshipping him as an aspect of Tiamat, and her church threatened to subsume Chazar's hero cult. In 1373, during the last Rage of Dragons, Tiamat resurrected Chazar, and he came to rule Simbar in his true dragon form as opposed to his human form. When the spell plague hit in 1385, Chazar was swept away by the blue fire to the Shadowfell and was enslaved by the blight dragon Silrigoth. In 1479, he was freed by the Brotherhood of the Griffin Mercenary Company and took over Luthchek as his kingdom. Through a series of shenanigans that are detailed in the Brotherhood of the Griffin novel series, which I haven't read and I'm just going off of wiki summaries, so that's why I'm keeping this section so short, Chazar ends up being killed by Shala Karanok of the Karanok family of Luthchek in 1479. Sometime after the Second Sundering, which occurred in 1486, Chazar was resurrected by Tiamat, again, and began to rule the city of Erebos. Now, let's talk about Chazar's divinity for a second, because it's kind of confusing. So, according to the 3rd edition book Dragons of Faerun, during the 1370s, the Church of Chazar became one of the most popular in Chessenta, giving hope that Chessenta would one day be a united country under Chazar's rule. Chazar served as Tiamat's champion, possessing the title of the Dragon Queen's Chosen. Despite this, he distanced himself from the Church of Tiamat as he didn't want to draw attention to his subservience to her. So, this seems to imply that while he does serve Tiamat, he is his own person and wishes to attain power and godhood without simply being a servant of the Dragon Queen, and that the Church of Chazar is separate from the Church of Tiamat. However, another 3rd edition source, Races of Faerun, states that Tiamat is known as Chazar in Chessenta. The 5th edition source Fizban's Treasury of Dragons states on page 6 that Tiamat has been known by other names, such as Chazar, and the 2nd edition source Powers and Pantheons lumps Chazar's information about him and his priests in with the Tiamat entry and lists Chazar as an alias for Tiamat, and states that, quote, in Chessenta, Tiamat continues to expand the ranks of her faithful in the guise of Chazar, end quote, implying that both Tiamat and her church are the same as Chazar and his church. That's just the name that she goes by in Chessenta. So all of these sources state that Tiamat and Chazar are one and the same. I believe what is happening here is that Chazar is an aspect of Tiamat. Aspects are alternative forms of gods. They are similar in terms of beliefs and what they are capable of, and they are considered the same being, but they do have a mind of their own, and they can differ from the original god. So Chazar is, I think, just an aspect of Tiamat, at least after the time of troubles, when Tiamat put her divinity in him and then reformed her avatar by destroying his body and then resurrected him. I think he's been an aspect ever since then. I don't think he was an aspect beforehand, because he wouldn't have had to go to all of this trouble to build up his worship and ascend to godhood, since Tiamat already had worship and was a goddess. So I think he was his own dragon at first, but after the time of troubles became an aspect of Tiamat, but he still has some of his own independence and free will. As of 1357, before the time of troubles, Chazar was a great worm with the abilities of a demi-power capable of granting up to 5th level spells to his priests. However, as of 1492, according to a tweet from Ed Greenwood, Chazar's priests were being granted spells by Tiamat and not him, further cementing this idea that he became an aspect after the time of troubles. Next god we have up is Tiamat. Even though Tiamat is usually worshipped as Chazar in Chessenta, 4th edition does state that there is a temple of Tiamat, not Chazar, in Erebos. It is located on its coast, overlooking the sea from atop a jagged plinth. Additionally, Tiamat was part of the Untheric pantheon, which obviously had a lot of influence on Chessenta, since they used to be a part of Unther, so it's no surprise that worship of her has picked up some followers within the region. How much interaction the Church of Tiamat has with the Church of Chazar as of the 1490s, it's unclear. We know that in the 1370s they were fairly separated, but I could definitely see Tiamat asserting her control over Chazar and trying to combine them into one over the past century. Joaquin. The Faerunian goddess of merchants, trade, and currency is the most popular deity in the middle class of Chessenta. She is worshipped as a protector of traders and has many temples throughout the cities of Chessenta, the largest being in Reth. With the lack of worship of Kelemvor in this region, Joaquinar clerics acted as guardians of the dead and performed funeral services in the ancient Neselthian tradition. Neselthian meaning of the Church of Nephthys, the Mulhorandi goddess of commerce, wealth, and protecting the dead and their riches. Since Nephthys is a goddess of both wealth and also protecting the dead, and Mulhorandi religious practices have influenced Chessenta given their history, it's kinda neat to see how they've adopted this Faerunian goddess of just commerce and sort of turned her into their version of Nephthys, elevating her to a goddess of the dead as well. Sebekar. The Untheric name for Sebek, the Mulhorandi god of crocodiles, is worshipped by the were-crocodiles of the Adder Swamp. And then the last god isn't really a god, but it's the various hero cults. So, with Chessenta's obsession with war heroes comes their worship. Hero cults are people that worship a Chessentan war hero. The Church of Chazar is the most well-known of these, and the only one to actually turn into a full-fledged religion, but there are dozens of other hero cults throughout the land. None have actually been detailed or named in lore, so I have no examples to give you, unfortunately. Economy. Chessenta possesses the Akinol, the second most fertile region around the Inner Sea. Its mountains teem with iron, silver, copper, and gold, and its forests are filled with fruit trees and grapevines. It has all the materials necessary to become the dominant trading power of the Sea of Fallen Stars. However, its lack of central government in favor of independent city-states that have a tendency to not cooperate stifles this potential. The farms of Chessenta are run by a freeholder using slave and serf labor, emphasizing quality over quantity, so all foodstuffs in Chessenta are more valuable than other places. As of 1357, most food came from the Akinol and the farms north of the Economir, which then fed Reth, Erspur, Simbar, Serenar, and Akanax. Most cities kept reserves of magically preserved food in case of war. Chessentan merchants form merchant companies in one city, then ally with merchant guilds in other cities to broaden their client base as much as possible. Chessentan governments usually impose a 15% tax on all exports, which accumulates as trade travels from city to city. Chessenta imports horses for cavalry, food from Thay in times of food shortages, slaves and magical trinkets from Thay, magic items, cheese, pork, glass, and perfume. Chessenta exports quality oils, mainly olive oil, fine wine, popular in the West for its rich character, salt from the Adder Swamp, literature, art, mainly sculptures in the shape of beautiful humans, often using granite imported from Mulhorand, iron, Chessentan iron is considered unusually high in quality, silver, gold, and sheep. Many Durpari merchants view a trip across the Sea of Fallen Stars as too long, and so sell their surplus to Chessentan merchants, who then sell it in Cormyr and Symbia for a large profit. Most cities have reserves of gold, jewelry, and silver from the days of Unther to use in case of emergencies, mainly to hire powerful wizards in times of war. Although some cities, such as Akanax, have been plundered and lost their hoards, while others like Luthchek are spending theirs so fast they'll likely run out soon. Coins. For most of Chessenta's existence, each city-state minted their own coins, usually with a ruler's face on one side and a divine symbol, usually commemorating a battlefield victory, on the other. Although each city's coins looked a little different, they were still referred to by the same names. In 1399, the coins were consolidated into a single currency by the war hero Ishul Karanok. During this time, all Chessentan coins were minted in Luthchek and featured the current ruler of the city, Warlord Shala Karanok, on one side and the burning brand of House Luthchek on the other. As of 5th edition, we don't know what they use, but given the cities are independent once again and no longer have their power consolidated in Luthchek, I imagine many cities went back to minting their own, but that's pure speculation. Instead of copper pieces, they used bronze ones called bits, and they were worth 2 copper pieces. Their silver pieces were called talents, and their gold pieces were called drakes. Instead of platinum, they used the authok and the bellbolt. The authok is mostly silver coin, but it is delmed, which is an alloying process where it is mixed with copper and certain white metals to avoid tarnishing. This turns the silver a translucent green and makes it impossible to shine. It is a square coin with a small hole in the center to put a string through, and it bears an engraved ring of 12 leaves encircling the hole on its face and a ring of 12 radiating daggers on the reverse. The authok is worth 5 gold pieces in Chessenta and only 1 silver piece in Kalimshan and Waterdeep. The bell bolt, also called the be bolt or just simply bolt, is a thick, heavy gold coin shaped like a circle with two shallow cutouts on its edges, causing it to resemble two axe heads fused back to back. The bell bolt is worth 20 gold pieces in Chessenta, but only 2 gold pieces in Waterdeep or Realmsian. Both the Authok and the bell bolt, in addition to being made and used in Chessenta, were also used in the Vilhan, the Border Kingdoms, the Tashalar, and everywhere south of that, throughout southern Faerun. They were also accepted in Scornu Bell, and Westgate, but they were not accepted in Cormyr, Symbia, the Dales, the Dragon Reach, the Moon Sea, the Sword Coast Lands, or Tethir. Geography. As of the 1300s DR, Chessenta's territory stretched from the Akana Peaks in the west to the Alamber Sea in the east, and its southern border followed along the River of Metals, Methmir, the Winding River, and the Adder Peaks. The region between Mesimbrar and Mount Tholbane is called Threskel. The people here consider themselves an independent nation, but most people believe it to be part of Chessenta. The countrysides of Chessenta are described as gentle rolling hills of fertile soil populated with terraced vineyards, olive tree orchards, and grazing pastures for sheep and rothe. After the Spell Plague, western Chessenta swapped with Shir, a Genasi realm of Abir, displacing the people and destroying the cities there. The Genasi then claimed that land and named it Akanal after the fertile piece of land within, and so the borders of Chessenta between 1385 and 1486 were smaller, stopping east at Mount Tholbane and stopping west at the Economir, although at the time it was known as the Mere that was, since it was no longer a lake. As of the current time period, which is the 1490s, Akanal seems to no longer exist, as its capital of Airspur is considered part of Chessenta now, but we do not know if Chessenta has expanded its borders back to the way it was. Given the short time span since the Sundering, and the fact that Chessenta isn't a united nation, it seems highly unlikely. Also, during the Spell Plague, many geographical features were significantly altered. The biggest one was the Sea of Fallen Stars water level being lowered, turning many port cities into, well, not port cities. As you can see from these two side-by-side maps, the left one being 2nd edition and the right being 4th edition, it is quite a bit different. The Adder Swamp is bigger, the Bay of Chessenta is smaller, the Economir is gone and is now 3 smaller lakes, some rivers diverted and new ones were made, etc. Anyways, the Second Sundering, which delineated the transition between 4th and 5th edition and occurred in 1486, returned Toral's geography back to the way it was before the Spell Plague. There are some exceptions, of course, such as Airspur still floating and Timanther still existing, but 99% of it returned. We don't know for a fact if Chessenta went back to the way it was, since no 5th edition map depicts this area, and the tiny amount of Chessentan lore in 5th edition makes no mention of its geography, but I think it is a fair assumption. When I mention areas from 4th edition, I will mention their altered geography when it's relevant, but I won't spend too much time focusing on it since it's only relevant during the 4E time period and no other edition. 4th edition has made my job so much harder than it needs to be. Anyway, let's move on to the main geographical features of Chessenta. First up, we have the Adder Hills. The Adder Hills are the northern foothills of the Adder Peaks, which forms the natural southern border of Chessenta. After the Spell Plague, the waves of blue fire turned them into earth motes, causing them to lift off the ground and float 1,000 feet in the air. They then became the homes of warring tribes of Aarakocra and Avariel. The Adder River. A river that runs from the Adder Peaks to the Bay of Chessenta, although on both the 2nd and 3rd edition map, it doesn't actually connect to the Adder Peaks, but I'm assuming that's just how the maps were drawn and not an accurate representation. It is described as a wide, slow, and muddy river known for lush vegetation and deadly snakes. The Adder Swamp. The Adder Swamp blocks the mouth of the Adder River and is home to a community of were-crocodiles that, as of the late 1300s, were at war with a community of were-rats. Most of these lycanthropes lived and fought in a half-sunken city on the Bay of Chessenta. The were-crocodiles apparently won this war since, as of 1480, the were-crocodiles had established a nation which they named after the god they worship, Sebekar, which is what the people of the region call Sebek, the Mulhorandi deity of crocodiles. They ruled from drowned ruins from the Second Untheric Empire and established a society where the were-crocodiles were the nobles and the were-rats were the lower-class merchants and laborers. The Economere, a great freshwater lake rich in fish and possessing fertile shores. It has at least one active pirate ship, a family of Vodyanoi, which are aquatic umberhulks, and a small community of lizardmen that dot the shore. The trading towns of Oslin, Merduth, and Rodinar lie on its coast. The Akinol. Located in southwestern Chessenta and surrounded by the Economere on three sides, the Akinol is the most fertile land in all of Chessenta. As of the 1300s, it was lined with large plantations of cash crops which were shipped to Akanax and Serenar, providing over 50% of Chessenta's food supply. Many of the wars fought in Chessenta have been over control of these lands. The destruction of the Spell Plague caused this area to be mostly uninhabited and uncultivated. Now that the Second Sundering has happened, I assume this fertile land is back, and the city-states of Chessenta will probably begin fighting over it sooner or later, which makes for great adventuring opportunity. The Icona Peaks. The second highest peaks in Chessenta, Mount Tholbane being the first, although 3rd edition actually says the Icona Peaks are the highest peaks. The only passage through is the Gap of Reth, called that because on the other side is the town of Reth. The western portion of the Icona Peaks houses the Flaming Spike Orc tribe, who inhabit the ruins of Dwarven mines. They raid western Chessenta and Halath and Nun in eastern Shondath. In the safer areas of the Icona Peaks, Chessentans mine iron. The River Acax runs between the Economere and the Bay of Chessenta and is navigable its entire length by small and medium-sized ships. Lake Acax. So the Spell Plague drastically altered the geography of the River Acax and the Economere. The Economere shrank and redirected into the Adder River. This cut off the River Acax, which was mostly consumed by the enlarged Adder Swamp, forming Lake Acax. It is a deep, hypersaline lake that is avoided and feared by most, to the point that many nicknamed it the Ghostmere. A species of elemental oozes that mimic those who die in its waters live here, and during the winter, the shoreline solidifies into a toxic sludge that can dissolve flesh and bone. The Bay of Chessenta, considered by many to be the best natural harbor in the eastern inner sea. Most of the travel between the cities of Chessenta is done across this bay, using oar-powered triremes since the winds tend to stop for days at a time. The coastline has many harbors and quays for ships to dock, and most ports tend to be heavily fortified with high sea walls and counter-siege weapons as of the late 1400s, since earlier in the century, attacks from sea-dwelling monsters were common. A lighthouse called Watcher's Cape lies on its northeastern end. It is nearly 800 feet high, and its light, the Drake Light, is lit when pirate ships are spotted entering the bay. As of 1357, it garrisoned 300 troops, 100 each from Luthchek, Serenar, and Mordulkin, who maintained the lighthouse and guarded against pirate raids. The Fields of Orium, a rolling grassland savanna south of the Bay of Chessenta. Few human settlements exist here because the soil is too dry and acidic for farmland, and because the area is home to cockatrices. Ancient Untheric ruins dot the tall grasses and scattered pine barrens. Most notable among these is the Temple of Ptah, rumored to possess holy tablets of magnificent power and wisdom. The Hills of Merth, also called the Mare Watch in the 1400s, lie between the Economere and the Adder River. They are low and rugged hills known for their rare minerals and dotted with ancient mines. A colony of rust monsters dwell here, making life hard for the miners. Every decade or so, the king of the nearby town Tulak sends mercenaries to extinguish them, but they would always return eventually. The Marchwood. Once a verdant woodland in southern Chessenta, the Spell Plague petrified the trees into a lifeless state, and elevated the landscape so that it jutted up hundreds of feet, forming an escarpment. As of 1480, a Shadow Guardian known as the Stormwalker guarded it. The Maw of the God Swallower. When the Spell Plague hit, many areas were permanently tainted by it, forming what was called Plague Lands. The Maw of the God Swallower is one of these, and is probably the most feared one. As you get to its edges, the sky darkens and the soil crumbles to dust under your feet. As you move farther in, the landscape completely falls away into an empty void. Suspended above this absolute nothingness is entropy, the gargantuan sphere of annihilation worshipped by many in Luthchek. It is said that its mere sight will shatter a mortal mind. I'd like to point out that this contradicts what the 4th edition Forgotten Realms campaign guide says, which states that entropy was changed into a fist-sized item still enshrined by the Karanok family in Luthchek. There's also multiple instances of artwork in 4th edition depicting entropy floating either with Shala Karanok or floating above the city of Luthchek. This can easily be explained as being one of the smaller orbs that Tiamat had entropy create, but it's simply believed to be the original sphere. Methmir, a serene freshwater sea inhabited by scrags, which are aquatic trolls, which patrol their domains diligently. Few settle on its coast, and only fools attempt to craft these waters. The dark waters are heated by volcanic vents on its floor, sending clouds of mist in the peaks of the Riders of the Sky. Speaking of which, next up is the Riders to the Sky. This is a mountain chain on Chessenta's southeastern border, ranging between 3,000 and 5,000 feet high. The southern cliffs are inhabited by pteranodons, known as Turu in the Old Empires, which are giant bird-like lizards. In the late 1400s, the Turu here were used as mounts by tribes of nomadic Wilden, which are tree-like fey creatures. Somewhere in the mountain range are the ruins of an Aarakocra civilization that were hunted to extinction by Chessentan mercenaries for sport. The eastern section of the Riders to the Sky are mostly cleared, but sometimes house bandits that conduct raids into Unther and Chessenta, and the western portions are much wilder, inhabited by troll villages, which are rumored to house half-drow exiled from the Yerwood long ago, and Dwagar dungeons. One of the mountains in this range is Dragonback Mountain, and is the lair of Alaskler Bambastos, the Great Bone Worm and secret lord of Threskel. The Sky Riders is what the foothills of the Riders to the Sky are called. The northern reaches around Dragonback Mountain were under the control of Alaskler Bambastos as of 1480. Threskel. So Threskel is the region between Mount Thulbane and the Riders to the Sky. Geographically, it consists of low plains and beaches, except for its sole mountain, Mount Thulbane. It is claimed by Chessenta and Unther, but really it's a part of neither. According to the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting, Threskel is claimed by the vampire green dragon Jackson-Nadiger. However, according to the later 3rd edition source, Dragons of Faerun, it is claimed by the blue Draco Lich Alaskler Bambastos, and Jackson-Nadiger is his vassal. At one point, Alaskler Bambastos claimed to be the king of Old Unther, and Jackson-Nadiger, as his vassal, claimed to be the viceroy of Threskel. So, I guess they both rule it, but Alaskler Bambastos is above Jackson-Nadiger. There was a 4th edition novel in the Brotherhood of the Griffin series where Jackson-Nadiger betrays Alaskler Bambastos, so I kinda doubt they're still working together. Within Threskel we have Mount Thulbane, and this is where Jackson-Nadiger lairs. It is an extinct volcano within Threskel, and it is the highest peak in Chessenta, according to the 2nd edition. As a vampire, Jackson-Nadiger cannot go out into the sunlight, but since the Spell Plague, Mount Thulbane has constantly been spewing ash into the sky, blocking the sun and allowing him to go out when he pleases. At least up until 1479, it is unclear if it still produces this ash as of the current 1490s after the Sundering. Jackson-Nadiger allowed the Red Wizards to build a Thayan embassy into the mountain. Thay sees this as a beachhead for southward expansion, and Jackson-Nadiger sees it as a way to consolidate his influence in Thay. It is said that the god Asaron, the name Chessentans and Untherans call Hor, the god of revenge and the patron of Chessenta, resides on the peak of Mount Thulbane. At the foot of the mountain are the Fields of Priolis, where competitions are held every 2 years to determine the finest athletes of Chessenta. Now we move on to the last, but definitely not the shortest section of this video, and that is the settlements. First we have Airspur. It had a population of 20,000 as of 1357, 22,000 in 1372, and 30,000 in 1479. Airspur was a trading port that at one time was the most important port in western Chessenta, although this title belonged to Reth as of 1357. At one point in the past, there was a bloody civil war between the many orc tribes living in the Akana Peaks, and the refugees from this war came to Airspur. This resulted in Airspur having a large half-orc population, roughly 30% of the total population. As of 1357, it housed an army of 3,000 troops, 500 archers, 500 cavalry, and 2,000 infantry. It was also used as a base of operations for 3 mercenary companies, the Sailors of the Crimson Sea, the War Dogs, and the Sun Lords. At one point, Airspur was a theocracy ruled by priests of Baelros, which is the name Talos, the god of storms and destruction, was known by in Airspur. These priests sacrificed a maiden every month and were wildly unpopular. As of 1357, Airspur was ruled by a military council led by the 8th level half-orc fighter Cruelus, a pragmatic but greedy ruler. He frequently accused rivals of being supporters of the Church of Baelros and would even occasionally have them charmed into performing Baelrosian ceremonies in public. When the Spell Plague hit in 1385, a gorge opened in the middle of the city, destroying most of it. Parts of Ibir were swapped with chunks of Toril, and the Genasi realm of Sheer swapped with parts of western Chessenta. The Genasi formed the nation of Akanul and built a new city on the cliffs of the gorge and the earth moats that now float above it, earth moats being chunks of the earth that float perpetually caused by the magic effects of the Spell Plague, and named the city Airspur after the former city, and it acted as the capital of Akanul. Other than its name, the two cities don't have much in common. The new Airspur is mostly Genasi. As far as I can tell, no old Chessentan buildings remain, and it was not part of Chessenta. After the Second Sundering of 1486, most of the changes from the Spell Plague were reversed. This included the earth moats, most of which collapsed back to the ground. However, the earth moats of Airspur remained in the air, and the Genasi city continues to exist to this day. However, the nation of Akanul seems to no longer exist, and Airspur is once again part of Chessenta, albeit a floating city mainly populated by Genasi. Now, even though the new Genasi Airspur is technically a part of Chessenta now as of 5th edition, I'm not going to be discussing what it's like in this video, because other than the fact that it's technically part of Chessenta, culturally it really isn't similar to Chessenta at all. It's very much its own thing. Maybe I'll do a video on it or Akanul later, but for this video I'm not going to be talking about it. If you want to learn more about it though, other than the obvious Forgotten Realms wiki, Dragon Magazine 377, it's got a whole article on it. Next up we have Akanax. It had a population of 20,000 within the city, but 70,000 if you include its rural areas as of 1357. In 1372, it had a population of 24,000. It's unclear if that's including rural or not, but I would assume not. Akanax is the philosophical opposite of Simbar. It is a harsh city of warriors, where males are all forced into military service, and deserters and anyone incapable of fighting are slain. The men eat a common mess and train together constantly. They aren't allowed to marry until 20 years of age, and cannot live with their wives until 30. Women exist to serve the men. Children are raised by the state, and the entire city is organized like a military camp, to the point that it is referred to as the City of Tents by their adversary city of Surinar. If you're thinking, wow, this sounds a lot like Sparta, well, now you get it. And just like Sparta, they're probably really gay. Strangers are barely tolerated in Akanax and are always met with suspicion, and mercenary companies are disallowed. Sometimes warriors desert Akanax to form their own mercenary companies, and many of the mercs in Mulhorand are of Akanaxian origin. Their army numbered around 20,000 as of 1357, with 5,000 archers and 15,000 infantry, and they also had a small navy of 10 warships. As of 1372, their army had increased to 50,000. As of 1357, Akanax was ruled by the tyrant Hippartes, who was considered the finest soldier in the south and was a 19th level fighter. Apico. Population 2,500 as of 1480. Apico is a fishing village that serves as a primary port for goods being shipped to Luthchek. I assume this is because Luthchek was no longer a port city at the time of 4th edition, which is where this information is coming from, since the inner sea's water level had fallen. So, it makes sense for goods to be shipped to the closest port city and brought to Luthchek. And any time before the Spell Plague or after the Second Sundering, Luthchek would be a port city and have no reason to have goods shipped to Apico as opposed to being shipped directly to them. I imagine after the Sundering, Apico would have had a sharp decline in trade for this exact reason, possibly driving people away and turning it into an even smaller village. Also, to avoid confusion, I realize that the map I have up has it spelled as Apesco with an S before the C, but the actual text in the article I'm getting this information from does not have the S, so I'm going to assume that's the correct one. Next up, we have Simbar. It had a population of 90,000 as of 1357 and 110,000 as of 1372. Simbar is commonly thought of as the capital of Chessenta, as it is one of the more culturally prominent cities. It also acted as the capital under the rule of Chazar when Chessenta was briefly united as one empire. Simbar is the quintessential symbol of a rich and prosperous city. The citizens participate in art, philosophy, and music, the streets are clean, and the buildings are beautiful. Simbar was divided into two sections, Old Simbar and New Simbar. New Simbar was built as a port by the Untheri sometime in the late -400s, and it housed the Great Palace, the home of the Septenar, which resided under the shadow of an old Untheri pyramid, many libraries, and the university, the largest center of learning in the Old Empires. The university was broken up into three colleges: the College of Mages, where magic was studied; the College of Sages, where bestiaries and books of factions on every known part of the realms were stored; and the Artist College, where poetry, paintings, and music were taught. Astronomy and mathematics were also taught at the university, although it doesn't specify at which college. I would assume the College of Sages. In 1370, the university was destroyed by a Shadow Weave artifact and was in the process of being rebuilt in 1372. New Simbar was the residential and mercantile district of Simbar, boasting most of the city's houses and shops. Simbar also had the largest port in the region, and the outskirts of the city contained theaters, the hippodrome, where horses and chariot races were held, and the arena, where athletes competed. In addition to the arts, Simbar was also a city of warriors, hosting the largest navy of the Inner Sea, second only to Thay. Their army numbered 15,000, consisting of 100 Griffin Riders, 100 Mage Artillery, 1,300 Marines, 9,000 Infantry, 2,000 Archers, and 2,500 Cavalry. At least 6 mercenary companies made their home here at any given time. Within Simbar were several factions. One was the Mob, a group of peasants, mercenaries, and young people who listened to demagogues, shouted, and sometimes rioted, pillaged, and murdered. They were easy to manipulate into violent acts, and they distrusted foreigners. The Church of Chazar was another faction. As of 1357, they proclaimed Chazar would return and lead Chessenta into a new golden age. However, few believed them. They ended up being sort of right, as Chazar did come back. As of 1357, Simbar was ruled by a king only known as the Septenar, who at the time was a 15th level mage. He held the scepter and crown of Chazar and ruled with absolute authority, although a senate elected from the land-holding males met frequently to make proposals, which the king usually listened to. In 1373, Simbar was once again ruled by the Great Red Dragon Chazar. In 1385, Simbar was destroyed by the Spell Plague. We have little info on Simbar after the Spell Plague, but I would assume it still lies in ruins. However, it's never really mentioned again after 1385. Erebos. Population of 35,000 as of 1480. Erebos, as of 1480, was described as a teeming metropolis known for its rich culture and was considered the quintessential Chessentan city, very similar to how Simbar was described. It was ruled by a Septenar, which is the exact title that the ruler of Simbar was called, and they wielded the Scepter of Chazar, which the Septenar of Simbar also wielded. It seems that Erebos is sort of the cultural replacement for Simbar after Simbar was destroyed. It makes sense that refugees from Simbar would have fled to Erebos, given their proximity to one another, and then brought their traditions and artifacts with them. Anyways, Erebos' buildings are of classical Untheric architecture and beautifully designed, and granite monuments decorate the city. It suffers from frequent earthquakes, but the buildings are sturdy and it is overall a comfortable place to live. As of 1480, Erebos had a population of 35,000, which consisted of 40% Mulan human, 20% Chondathan human, 15% Tarami human, 10% Dragonborn, 5% Genasi, and 10% other, and an army of 8,000. It also had a formidable navy that had never lost a battle in the 40 years of its existence. It was ruled by a Septenar that wielded the Scepter of Chazar, although later in the same source it's called the Scepter of Simbar, but that might just be an error or an alternative name for the magic item. And this magic item can magically make the wielder appear faceless and androgynous in order to hide their identity. As of 1492 DR, Chazar himself had returned and began ruling Erebos. Heptios. Population of 9,000 as of 1480. Heptios was once a formidable city-state, but as of 1480 it was a vassal of Luthchek and was ruled by administrator Epramusa, who secretly plotted against the Caranochs in the hopes that she can make her city independent once again. She apparently succeeded, since as of 1492, Heptios was once again an independent city-state. In 1480, it was described as a city of commerce, moving goods in and out of Chessenta, while in 1492, it was described as a city of philosophers containing the largest library in Chessenta at the time, where nobles sent their children to be educated. These two descriptions are not contradictory, I just find it interesting that 4th edition never mentions its library or culture of intellectuals, while 5th edition never mentions its focus on commerce. Another interesting tidbit I found is that in 2nd edition, in 1357, there was an NPC in Simbar named Heptios. He was the most powerful wizard in Chessenta at the time and had abandoned the wizard's life to become a wandering philosopher, leading a small band of other philosophers called the Hepti and speaking to crowds in Simbar about the importance of rationalism over superstition and emotion. The city of Heptios is lore from 4th edition, but presumably it has been there longer than that. So, perhaps Heptios the mage was from the city and was named after it, or maybe he was always from Simbar and his parents just thought the name sounded cool. Also, since he was a philosopher and Heptios the city was known for their philosophers, perhaps Heptios was built after the Spell Plague and named in his honor. We don't really know anything for sure, but there's a lot of interesting things you could do with it. It's not really super relevant, but I thought it was interesting enough to share. Next up is Luthchek, and I probably have the most information on this place compared to any of the other settlements we'll be talking about. It had a population of 50,000 in 1357, 61,000 in 1372, and 38,000 in 1480. Luthchek was also known as the City of Madness, and was ruled by the insane Caranoch family, who were devoted to a strange god named Entropy and believed it was their duty to hunt down and kill all wizards. Luthchek was taken over by the Caranoch family in 1161 under mysterious circumstances, and all historical records of this event were destroyed. Presumably, they assassinated all members of the leading noble family, as they have no known descendants. In 1324, Luthchek invaded Mordulkin to take advantage of their losses from a plague, but were defeated. They blamed the loss on wizard spies, and the Caranochs have been obsessed with killing wizards ever since. In 1346, while torturing a wizard, a giant sphere of annihilation they later named Entropy appeared, engulfing the wizard and completely annihilating him. This further reinforced their belief in the persecution of spellcasters, and they began worshipping Entropy as a god. The Caranochs offer bounties for captured wizards, who they then burn at the stake in witchweed fires. In addition to arcane spellcasters, they also kill friends of spellcasters, elves who they view as inherently magical, and dwarves as they view as earth wizards. After the Spell Plague, Luthchek, devastated by the Blue Fire, the Abelethic Sovereignty, and the marauding monsters fleeing the erupting volcanoes of the east, rallied under the war hero Ishual Caranoch. He disbanded the wizard-slaying cult, but continued to promote the worship of Entropy and subjugate spellcasters, only killing them if they refused to get green sigils tattooed on their palms to proclaim them as a spellcaster. Rumors said that spellcasters with these tattoos could only cast spells if they knew the mark's password. Luthchek is built at the bottom of a black cliff face, half of its structures embedded in the rock. Its layout was confusing and maze-like in order to disorient invaders. As of 1357, it was divided into the port section, the trading section, the palace section, the Temple of Entropy, and the slave farms where witchweed was grown. By 1480, its major districts consisted of the Palace Heights, where the city's famous war college resided, the Temple Square, which was rebuilt from the old priest quarters where the Temple of Entropy used to stand, the Trade Center, a trapezoidal marketplace with a vaulted roof painted with depictions of heroism and athletic prowess, the Old Port, where most of the middle class lived, the Arcane Byway, a quarantine zone for spellcasters, and the Ropemaker's Quarter, which was the slums that the poor lived in. As of 1357, priests of Entropy patrolled the streets with censers of burning witchweed to cleanse the city of magic. The taxes in Luthchek were extremely high during this time, and the merchants were considering going on strike and withdrawing their services from the city. A group of wizards and friends of wizards called the Mages Society devoted themselves to the destruction of the Caranochs and the witchweed fields. During this time, its army consisted of 10,000 soldiers, 8,000 infantry, 1,000 archers, and 1,000 cavalry. It also boasted 15 large warships. No mercenaries or adventuring parties made their base here, as anyone suspected of associating with wizards were also burned, and by 1372, mercenary companies were officially banned from operating within the city. As of 1480, its population of 38,000 was 90% Mulan humans. The ruler of Luthchek as of the late 1300s was Lord Malos, an 18th level priest of entropy. After the Spell Plague, the war hero Ishual Karanok ruled. In 1479, Chazar returned and took Luthchek over as his domain. He enacted laws to protect magic users while in charge, but his reign only lasted until later that year when he was killed. Then, it was ruled by warlord Shala Karanok, governing the city from the War College, which jutted out from the cliff overlooking the city. As of 1480, Luthchek was considered the nominal capital of Chessenta, and many of the nearby settlements were vassals of the city. However, this doesn't seem to be the case anymore as of 1492. Mordulkin. Population 35,000 as of 1357. It was ruled by the Jadea family ever since Chessenta rebelled from Unther, and it lies on the eastern shore of the Bay of Chessenta. The most powerful mage in the Jadea family acted as the ruler, and as of 1357, the ruler was the 12th level mage Hercules Jadea. The city is considered a haven for wizards, which obviously makes Luthchek their enemy, but even before the rise of the anti-magic Karanok family, Mordulkin and Luthchek hated each other. It is said the lords of Mordulkin would take any opportunity to burn Luthchek to the ground and sow their fields with salt so that nothing could grow there again. Mordulkin is divided into sections, each run by a guild. The Merchants Guild runs the Merchant District, the Craft Guilds run the Crafts District, and the Builders Guild runs the Residential District. There is also a Mercenary Guild that all mercenary and adventuring companies must register with within 24 hours of entering the city or else face imprisonment. In 1357, the city had an extensive school for mages. Mordulkin is extremely wealthy and home to the largest organized thieves guild in the south and the second largest port in Chessenta. As of 1357, it had a standing army of 8,000, consisting of 6,000 infantry, 1,000 archers, and 1,000 cavalry. For every 100 members, there is one mage between 1st and 5th level. Next up we have Morktar, population 10,000 as of 1357. A small but aggressive trading city located on the edge of the flat, sandy plains of Threskel. It had a large port facility that handled goods for the farmers and herdsmen of Threskel. Miners and the riders to the Sky Mountain shipped goods to Morktar as it's closer to large trading centers such as Byzanter and Sultum than Mordulkin is. Morktar's main enemy was the Sawagan kingdom of Alixtis in the Alamber Sea, as they frequently raided their villages and fishing boats and sank trading ships. They had an army of 500 and could draft 2,000 from the city's population and surrounding areas. It was ruled by a king who descended from the lords who led Morktar's secession from Unther. In 1357, the king was Theris, who was dying without an heir, so his god instructed him to host an athletic tournament to determine his successor. Morktar was destroyed during the Spell Plague by the rising of the sea levels. Pandric, population 6,500 as of 1480. Pandric is a fortress city that is culturally similar to Akanax, where citizens are forced into military service at a young age. The main difference is that they conscripted both male and females, unlike the Akanaxians. As of 1480, it was ruled by King Xerus, who at the time maintained an uneasy truce with Luthchek. Reth, population 35,000 in 1357 and 63,000 in 1372. Reth was the westernmost city of Chessenta, a fast-growing port and trading center. Its main industries were fishing, quarrying, and logging, although it had largely abandoned the logging industry by 1372 due to the closest forest being far away and hostilities with the Emerald Enclave. It had a loose alliance with the Chondathan city of Hlath and the village of Nun to protect each other from attacks by sea. Iron is mined in the Akana Peaks, but otherwise it was far from any production centers, being separated from the rest of Chessenta by the Gap of Reth in the Akana Peaks, which is spanned by a protective wall. It was once famous for being a training center for gladiators, and in 1372 they still held gladiatorial combats twice a Tinde in its Great Arena. In addition to the Great Arena, Reth also had a temple to Bane called the Temple of Dark Eyes. The maritime mercenary company, the Wraith of the Inner Sea, used this port as their home base. As of 1357, it was ruled by a council of merchants who kept tariffs lower than any other city in Chessenta, making it an attractive port city. Being merchants, the Lords of Reth strived to stay out of armed conflicts. By 1372, it was governed by an elected mayor, but the true power was held by 7 autocrats called the Seven Senators, each controlling a different aspect of government. Geographically, Reth is a part of the Vilhan Reach, not the Old Empires, and the 3rd edition Forgotten Realms campaign setting book lumps it in with Shondath, even though Reth gained its independence from Shondath in 900. However, the 2nd edition sourcebook Old Empires considers it a part of Chessenta, so that's why I have it included. During the Spell Plague, half the city was destroyed, drowned from the rising of the sea level. The other half survived and still had people living in it as of 1395, but it is unclear what it's like now, a century later. Rodanar. Population 5,000 in 1357. However, 1,000 of that 5,000 were garrisoned soldiers. Rodanar was founded by Chazar as a fort town to defend against orc tribes of the Akana Peaks. As of the 1100s, it was a large city, but a war with Akanax destroyed it. It was then rebuilt, and as of 1357 was a small town and vassal of Akanax, serving as a trading center for the western interior of Chessenta. Saidin. Population 900 as of 1480. Saidin was an independent inland thorp located on the southern section of the Adder River. Its most notable feature was an ancient temple to Marduk that dominated its central plaza. Marduk was the aspect of Bahamut that was a member of the Untheric pantheon, being worshipped by the Untherans as a god of cities, wind, thunder, storms, and rain. As of 1480, the priests of this temple preached the teachings of Bahamut, but still practiced their old customs, such as painting a pair of eyes and ears on their shaved scalps. Somner. Population 1300 in 1480. A small coastal village on the eastern coast of the Bay of Chessenta, between Heptios and Mordolkin. This is the site Ishual Karanok first encountered and drove off the Abilethic sovereignty that threatened Chessenta's existence in the early years after the Spell Plague. A granite monument was raised to honor his victory, overlooking the village from a nearby hill. Somner also housed a hidden temple to Umberlee that was only accessible through a secret grate in the lagoon floor. Sulabox. Population 1600 in 1480. A walled frontier town in eastern Chessenta, primarily serving as a defense against raiders from Threskel. As of 1480, it was ruled by the Baron Hasos Thora, a vassal of Luthchek. Sorinar. Population 73,000 as of 1372. Sorinar was a large, aggressive port city whose lords were related to the lords of Luthchek, although without their hatred of wizards. They believed they were destined to rule over all of Chessenta. All they must do is conquer Simbar, and the other cities will bow to their rule. The city was divided into 2 sections, East and West Sorinar, which are separated by the Akax River Delta. There were no bridges on the river, requiring a ferry service to cross between. East Sorinar contained the docks, storage facilities, and amenities for adventuring parties and mercenary companies, and was the smaller of the 2 halves. West Sorinar was the heavily guarded section where most citizens lived. As of 1357, a family of were-crocodiles lived in the sewers and came up to eat people, but as they only ate peasants, the nobles ignored them. Sorinar's philosophy to warfare was to purchase victory, buying the services of high-level wizards and mercenaries. Their standing army was 5,000 strong, 1,000 cavalry, 1,000 archers, and 3,000 infantry. In their war with Simbar in 1357, they boosted their army to 15,000 via mercenaries and forced induction of citizens and slaves. Sorinar's lords were the representatives of the 3 leading noble families, Thuric, Yashur, and Brolkchan, which were the 3 founding families that defeated the armies of Unther when Chessenta seceded. Sorinar was inundated during the Spell Plague, and as of 1480, its ruins sat underwater and was a popular spot for treasure hunters. After the Sundering, the water levels normalized, so one could assume its ruins now lie above water, making them even easier to access, and making them uninhabited by the many water-breathing creatures that had taken up homes there. Now is probably a great time for adventurers looking for treasure. Thamor. Population 3,000 as of 1357. Thamor was a small trade city in the interior of Threskel, originally founded by merchants from Morktar and Mesimprar to be a free city where they could trade with Unther and Mulhorand without worrying about taxes or duties. Both Unther and Mulhorand objected to this, and Thamor ultimately still had to follow the trade laws of the two countries. As of 1357, it was a settlement of mostly merchants trading with miners in the Riders of the Sky Mountains and farmers in southern Threskel, and it was subjected to controls by Morktar. Thuric, population 300 as of 1480. Thuric was a trading post on the edge of the northwest section of the Adder Swamp, acting as a means for the lycanthropes of Sebekar to trade with Erebos and for adventurers exploring the ruins of Serenar to resupply. Torius, population 17,000 as of 1480. Torius was a city just north of Mordulkin. It was originally a garrison of Mordulkins, but grew over the 1400s into Chessenta's third largest city. The city has gained the ire of the other Chessentan city-states with its aggressive commercial tactics, rumored ties to pirates and criminal organizations, and its open trade with Thay, allowing them to place an embassy within their city. Torius is known for accepting all people, even those from lands that are despised, and it's said that foreign coin can buy anything there. Tulak, population 1100 as of 1480. Tulak was a small town between the Merthwatch and the Adder River. Despite its small population of 1100, Tulak was ruled by a king. And that is all of the information I could find on Chessenta. This was a long one, and it took me a lot of work to make this, so I really hope you guys enjoyed this. Thank you guys so much for watching, and remember to subscribe for more D&D related content.